All right, what is going on, Dark and Darker Dungeon Delvers? I am out here today with the update that hopefully you're looking for, and I hate to be the bearer of bad news. Please don't shoot the messenger. But Onepeg recently released a video about 2 hours ago called Dark and Darker Gets a Korean Court Win, and I'm just gonna play a tidbit of his video here because unfortunately I'm gonna have to go against the grain here. And I mean, I'm still holding shields up, boys. We're going the distance, but there is no chance in hell that you can look at what happened in court yesterday in Korea and call it a win for Ironmace. All right. At best, it's neutral. It's just normal news. So I'm going to go into all of the aspects of this here in just a minute, and then I'm going to give you a very neutral look at both sides of the case and both sides of the legal arguments, as well as a couple quotes from the lawyers themselves. Thankfully, on the Dark and Darker Discord, we have both the English chat and the Korean chat. And so if you actually dive into the Korean chat and you do translations and you talk to them and you ask them for the truth or their version of the truth, I think it gives you a better understanding and a clearer picture of the entirety of what's happening. So this is Onepeg and his take, calling this a dub.
Right. So, yeah, but apparently they did not, the judge did not grant the injunction. They said that they were going to see it over. So no injunction granted. They get to keep conducting business, which is that's a W for Ironmace. It's a huge W for Ironmace because they like the TRO failed. Like the temporary injunction failed against Ironmace today, which is huge. Because if they had a temporary injunction, that would have been it. Again, we're talking about Korean court proceedings, and I don't know how often they are granted injunctions, because of, Corporation 1 versus Corporation 2, and Corporation 1 asks for an injunction. I don't know how often, Korean courts grant these kind of things. Like, do they almost never do them? Is it usually all the time? But either way, it allows Ironmace, at least for the interim period, which looks like this is going to be 4 weeks. Court decided to have a hearing period of about 4 weeks to review each claim. The materials submitted by each company exceeded 5,000 pages in addition to the ongoing lawsuit.
Okay, so first and foremost, this is incorrect because we're not actually at the stage of being in court. Yesterday, when they sat down with the judge and all of the lawyers and both teams, it was not to proceed with the trial. It was to submit evidence for an injunction. So here Onepeg is saying that Nexon failed to get their injunction. This is actually incorrect. What actually happened was that the hearing yesterday on June the 21st in Korea was a hearing to submit an interim injunction, which is a preliminary thing that you do before a trial. So essentially Nexon is asking the judge to look at the evidence and to stop Ironmace from continuing work on Dark and Darker and releasing early access. So we do not have an outcome for that yet because, like he pointed out, the court needs 4 weeks to go over the material because both sides submitted something like 10,000 pages of evidence and all of the laptops with both sides' code. So the judge is going to look at all of the evidence from both sides and decide whether or not they should grant Nexon in Korea an injunction. This is not a win for Ironmace at all. This is just the first battle that has now commenced, and both teams have submitted all their evidence and made their arguments, and now the judge has 4 weeks to sit there and go through all of this with legal arbitrators and figure out which side actually has a legal merit. And so there is no win at all. It is just the first step in the first battle. And 4 weeks from now, the outcome will likely affect the entirety of this community and Ironmace and Nexon going forward. Because if they are granted their injunction, that is going to look really bad for Ironmace in Korea. And then going forward, what happens a lot of times is that in legal proceedings, judges typically tend to favor prior proceedings. And so if the injunction is granted in Korea, that is going to reflect badly on the US court case, which was just extended 30 days. So the first thing to be decided in this timeline will be this injunction. And then the next thing that will take place will be the US injunctions and TROs, followed by the actual trials, the real court cases in both Korea and the US. So going forward, guys, I'm sorry that this is, a lot of it is, it's hard to break down and talk about in a simplified manner. I have created this document, which I'm going to post in the Dark and Darker Discord and inside of this video if you want to dive in here. I've compiled all of this information over the last year, you know, looking at the rabbit holes and what have you. But what we can look at first and primarily is that we have a lot of different media outlets from Korea weighing in on what happened yesterday in court. So this is the one that Onepeg is going over in his video. And so he basically uses just one article, which is the Nexon Ironmace's Dark and Darker service. And then his view at the end of it was that it is a win for Ironmace and Darker. And unfortunately, what I can say is that it's neutral. So here's his article. I will link this as well. It'll all be here for you, and you guys can go over it, or you can watch Onepeg's video. And then here is what I would consider to be a much better article that is way less in favor of one side or the other. So this is going to be the article that I'm using. This is the Invent article. It's the same article we used when Ironmace offices were raided by the police. It takes a pretty neutral standpoint and gets a nice look at both sides. And so inside of this case, we've got a lot of quotes from the lawyers and a good breakdown of both sides. I'm not going to read the article. I'm going to link it and you guys can read it yourself. But what I've done is I've taken all of the lawyer quotes from Nexon and the lawyer quotes from Ironmace's teams, and I've put them back to back, and then I've also made an entire timeline of the case. So I'm hoping to break this down pretty easily. So long story short, yesterday both sides went to court, right? They went before a judge and they presented all of their evidence. This has been going on for 2 years, by the way, fam. So for a lot of people that are saying this all kind of just started, this is false. So I'm going to start down here on the timeline to give us, I put unofficial because I haven't linked all my sources. And again, guys, you will have to go do your own research because some of the sources are in other videos. And to be honest, I don't know shit when it comes to legal cases. I'm just going to be very, very honest. This is why I'm going to be neutral for most of this, because I just don't know. It seems like both sides have a strong argument to me. So I don't know. Like I'm very curious to see what's going to happen on July 19th, because I think that'll be the first step in figuring out who's right and who's wrong. But I will say that Korea, I believe, works on more of an honor system, and the US may favor, you know, companies based on revenue or, you know, indie devs or whoever sort of just has a better case in general. Anyway, both the news articles are linked here as well. So this all begins in September of 2021, where the lead dev of Project P3 for Nexon and 10 of their employees basically quit the project and they quit working for Nexon. Directly after that, the lead dev and a lot of those employees created a new gaming studio called Ironmace. Ironmace is funded by 2 angel investors, and the company grows to somewhere around 22 developers. Very quickly after this, as you can see, immediately, Nexon throws up some red flags, and they decide that this is not good behavior, and it is very likely, in their opinion, illegal. So they go to a judge where they are granted a provisional seizure of Ironmace's assets, and the local police investigative unit goes and raids Ironmace headquarters. This is way back in 2021, guys. They try to take the evidence that they found, and in my opinion, this would be where most of the evidence is coming from, right? Directly after the creation of the game studio, they should have found the most evidence here. Now, they push the case to trial, but the sitting judge in Korea sends the case back, citing a lack of evidence. Now, this is important, I think. This right here, in my opinion, is the biggest win for Ironmace. And then it's about a year later when they're granted a second provisional seizure of Ironmace's assets, where the local investigative unit goes back and raids Ironmace again. And this is important because about at this point, Ironmace has released multiple playtests, and it is very obvious that they are going to be a giant in the gaming industry, and there are millions of accounts created across internal and all of the playtests. So, everyone's talking about it. All the Twitch streamers are playing it. YouTube's going wild. There's tons of articles about it in both Korea and globally. And so this is important because then they seize more assets of Ironmace. And then they send a DMCA takedown notice to Steam, which removes Dark and Darker from its platform. This is where a lot of the problems begin with Ironmace and the playtests. And then recently, Nexon has taken Ironmace to court in the US, and then Ironmace just filed for a 30-day extension to push the trial back. Very likely because they knew they were about to walk into trial in Korea. And so this all comes from June the 21st, where Nexon goes, takes Ironmace directly to trial in Korea. All of the lawyers go there, all the evidence is handed over, and now it will be decided on July the 19th whether or not Nexon's interim injunction will be decided. So in my opinion, both sides may or may not have legal merit. I don't know. There's a lot to take in here. So if that's all you guys wanted to hear, just a summation of events, you can go ahead and close the video down. But if you want to dive into the details, I'm going to make it as easy as possible to understand. I've written it all down in what I hope is pretty clear on both sides' takes on what is happening. So let me just take a little drink of tea. So Nexon is claiming that from about 2017 to 2019, we can really say, we can kind of put, we'll go ahead and we'll stay with these dates. From about 2017 to 2019, Nexon was working on two projects, Dave the Diver and Project P3. And this argument is important because they're saying that both projects were delayed because of COVID and other, let's just call it other internal issues. Whatever the case was, both of these projects were delayed. Dave the Diver resumed development after COVID and became a resounding success in the market and on Steam. People love the game. It's about sushi and diving. I don't know. We don't really need to get into it. And so the issue with P3 is that development did not continue after COVID because the lead developer quit and stole or leaked assets from the project, took some of the employees to a new studio, and then released the exact same game labeled Dark and Darker. This is Nexon's main argument, is that one game continued development under all of the same provisions and was a success, so likely it would have been the same for P3. Ironmace is saying that P3 was abandoned either because of financial issues or what have you, and that the lead developer was betrayed and things weren't going the way that they had hoped for, and so they decided to quit and make their own studio. This seems like fair competition to me, and like if you gave them what they were looking for and you gave them more resources or you gave them, whatever they were asking for, they would have made the game for you, but they decided that it was bad circumstances, what have you, it wasn't a good work environment, whatever the case was. Ironmace is saying that they legally quit and decided to do their own thing, and with their very first game, it's a resounding success. So the lead dev quit, invited others from the project in a new venture, and they created Ironmace. Sure, they used some of the same assets, but those are store-bought assets that everyone has access to. So if any of the code is the same, it's because they bought some of the same assets legally. The mainstay of this argument is that Nexon was never going to finish P3, and that they abandoned the project to save money or go in another direction. And Dark and Darker, the release of Dark and Darker would not and should not have affected the release of Project P3 if Nexon had continued developing it. And this is really important because one of the main arguments that we're going to see down here is that Ironmace lawyers claim that if they can't complete the project because they lost a couple of devs, then it means they would never have completed the project, because Nexon is a giant $20 billion corporation and they have thousands of developers and a ton of studios. So losing 10 people, that should just be like, oh well, we'll put a bunch more devs on it and we'll release it if they thought it was a good project. And I do think this is a strong argument here. But so now diving in a little bit further and kind of looking into the timeline. So this is sort of what happened to get to where we are today. So Nexon is saying that the lead dev of P3 used criminal actions and they applied for that provisional seizure and then got it. So the issue that arose here was because during COVID, the lead of P3 was working from home and he had a remote server with all of the assets for Project P3. Originally, he had authorization to use that server and to communicate remotely with all the other employees to continue working on this, basically giant project where at least 20 devs were working. Nexon claimed that he copied code from that server and released the assets publicly, and he didn't have authorization for extended use of the server. Initially, they have said that he did have use of the code and the private server from home, but that expired and he continued to use it. And this part right here is very important to me because I think it's a strong argument for Nexon, because the lead dev and the Ironmace employee acknowledged that he did use the server after he was not allowed to use it anymore. He said he thought he had extended authorization, but he now realized that they did not give him further authorization. However, he said he wiped the server when they asked him to and that nothing was stolen. But I do think that this is a strong case for Nexon to make. He acknowledged that he did not have access to that server anymore and continued to use it anyway. So whether or not anything was stolen, I think that this is a strong argument for Nexon. So going further on, we've kind of already gone over this part, right? So they got the provisional seizure, they hit Ironmace twice, and now we are seeing the first actual court battle happening, but we won't know the outcome for the next 4 weeks. So here are all of the pro Nexon lawyer arguments from the article. Again, this is coming from the Inven, which I consider to be more of a neutral news source compared to this one, which was definitely pro Ironmace. And so going into this, so they're saying, Nexon is saying that Project P3 experienced data leaks during that developmental hiatus, which caused them to lose the opportunity to resume development and release the game similar to what they did for Dave the Diver. And here is a very strong argument that I think Nexon is making. They are saying that the gaming industry considers the first mover advantage crucial. And so even if they finish Project P3 now, they would suffer irreparable damages because Ironmace has already launched Dark and Darker. This is a strong argument in my opinion. I'd love to know what you all think down below in the comments, but I do think there is something to be said about the first mover advantage, and that had things not been leaked, they could have put the project out first. But I don't know, that could go both ways, right? Because they had plenty of time. They could have moved more devs onto the project. Why haven't they continued working on P3? I think is a good argument from Ironmace. So next, they're saying that they don't lack the intention to develop it. It's just the fact that data was illegally stolen and leaked, and then all the devs left to make the same game. So at that point, they put it all on pause to pursue legal action. And I think if you look at the timeline, that actually is a strong argument for them, right? They're saying we didn't keep working on it because we were busy trying to stop Ironmace from working on it. And I think that could be a strong argument for them as well. But again, I'm not a lawyer. But I'm not a rapper, though. All right, so next, they say that we didn't expect the lead dev to go this far. When Dark and Darker was released, we promptly took action. We submitted opinions to the police and the prosecution, resulting in the actual issuance of the 2 warrants for further investigation. The claim that Nexon cannot develop is surprising, they think, because out of 20 people, 10 were isolated during COVID and 10 quit. So when we asked the remaining dev if they would continue the development, they said, "How can I? How can I proceed in a state of betrayal?" And this is the essence of their legal argument. Again, because Korea, I believe, is more of an honor-bound society, I think that this holds a lot of sway. They left and they stole the code and they made the same game. We are betrayed. So in my opinion, this is a strong argument. going forward for some pro Ironmace lawyer arguments, they're saying that even though this incident occurred 2 years ago, why has Nexon basically been silent until now, really until the resounding success of Dark and Darker? So according to Ironmace, it's evident that Nexon basically just gave up on P3, and they, according to them, I like this, they let it go to waste. And the application for this injunction based on partially developed, essentially unfinished P3 is unnecessary. I think that this is also a strong argument for Ironmace. Why didn't they finish P3? They have a zillion resources. If they really thought it was going to be great, they should have went for it. It's not our fault that with our small studio, we just beat them to the punch, according to the sort of first mover advantage. They had all the time in the world. They could have already beat them to the punch. So I do think that's another strong argument. And they're saying that Nexon is claiming that when the developers resigned, this led to the abandonment of P3. But Nexon has thousands of devs and dozens of studios. It is inconceivable that a few team members or a single director leaving would result in them giving up on this potentially successful game. Again, another strong argument, I think, from Ironmace. Nexon claims that a couple devs leaving resulted in the inability to complete the project. If that is the case, then even now, they will never be able to finish that project. It is illogical for Nexon to claim the necessity of preservation based on a game that they cannot complete themselves. I do think that that is a good argument. That is counterintuitive, and Nexon kind of shot themselves in the foot there. So according to this assumption, Nexon views the previously developed Project P3 and the entity of the game, the concept of this corridor-based dark dungeon, as the same entity. So Nexon is basically copywriting this genre based on an unfinished P3. But if they claim that they cannot complete Project P3 due to the departure of the devs, it means they acknowledge that they cannot compete or create Dark and Darker or that game concept. So they've really sort of doubled down on the fact that they're saying that Nexon had all the time and all the resources in the world to finish P3, and instead of doing that, they basically just, went for legal action and abandoned the project. So I also feel like this has merit. And what it's going to come down to, in my opinion, and what none of us will have access to, is the actual evidence of the case. And we probably will not see that until at least July the 19th when this decision is made, I would guess. I mean, if someone can get that sooner, that would be great. But the actual evidence of whether or not code was stolen from P3, in my opinion, is going to be the major factor of this case. And because the judge has 10,000 files, it's got the laptops with all the code, it's really up to them now. It's out of our hands. We're just going to hold. We're going to be pro Ironmace. We're going to be pro Dark and Darker. And we're going to hope for the best. But again, going back to Onepeg, I just think that we cannot call this a win for Dark and Darker. It's just the first step in the battle, and the lines have been drawn in the sand, and both sides are now aligned against each other with big lawyers on both sides and big business. So now it's going to be up to third-party arbitration, the judge and the legal aspects, to decide the outcome of this case. And so that's all I've got for this video, guys. I'm sorry it's not super great news, but I just felt like we needed to have two sides of the argument. And I love Onepeg, and I hope he's right that somehow this is a win and that we come out of this with a win on the 19th. But I think for now, we wait, we hold, and we prepare to charge, because both sides have a great legal basis, and all we can do is support the side that we love the most. And you gotta love Dark and Darker. All right, I'll see you all for the next one.